All right.
Awesome. Would you mind introducing yourself again real quick so that, because I just started recording.
No problem. Hello, I'm Caitlin. I'm a sex educator. I have been for the past year and a half. I teach sex ed in schools and with families and with people with disabilities and anybody and everybody who wants comprehensive sex ed. And I have 3 kiddos, a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a almost 9-year-old. And I think that was everything. Yeah. All right. So I thought we could introduce ourselves. And I thought we could say our names, who are kiddos, how old they are, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not comfortable at all, 5 being super comfortable. How comfortable are you talking to your kids about sex? And I said I was between a 4 and a 5, because sometimes when it's your own kiddos, sometimes it can be a little bit more nerve-wracking talking about sexuality and sex than when you're talking to strangers about it. So that's where I'm at. So who would like to introduce themselves next? Any volunteers?
I'm Lissy, and I have a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old, and I am probably on the low end of a 3. I don't want to quite say I'm a 2, but but yeah, I'm definitely not feeling great about it.
Thank you, Lissy.
I'm Ruth. I have a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old, and I am probably a 3, I think. I'm probably right in the middle in terms of comfort.
Great. Thank you, Ruth.
Hi, I'm Vanessa. I have a 7 and a 9-year-old, and I would say I'm a 5.
Nice. So super comfortable.
Situation. So I think I'm Wednesday Addams from Addams Family Values. You know that part where the little girl's like, I'm getting a new baby from the stork. And then Wednesday Addams my parents had sex. Like, I feel like I'm that parent. So we'll see how it goes as they get older, though.
Right. Yeah. I feel super happy for my kiddos that they have a sex educator for a mom, but at the same time, I'm like, oh, I wonder what it's gonna be like when they're older. They're gonna be like, Mom, enough. Okay, I know about condoms. Let's move past it. But I'm just gonna keep doing it. All right. So there's only like 4 of us, but anytime I teach a lesson, we always have group agreements, just to make sure that we're in a safe space. Because when we're talking about sex and sexuality, sometimes that can be triggering for some folks. Sometimes it can make them uncomfortable to talk about. So we want to make sure that we keep a safe space for everybody here today. So some of the group agreements that I have on here are to respect each other. That goes without saying. Let's all just be respectful. My favorite that I have taught my kiddos, which is don't yuck my yum, which means not everybody likes the same things, and that's totally fine because we're all diverse. We all have different interests. We all like different things, whether that's pineapple on pizza, whether that's eating spicy Cheetos with cheese, like everybody likes different things. And when you say that something's gross or yucky or ew, then it can make the other person feel judged. So we're not going to say ew or gross to things just because we don't like it. And so that's a rule that we have in my home. And it always gets said, don't yuck my yum. Just because you don't like it doesn't mean you can keep those feelings to yourself. So yeah, that I think is a super fun one. I want to get a shirt that says that. Confidentiality. So as Lissy said, this is going to be recorded, but if there's any questions or comments that you all want to bring up privately, feel free to stay after and we can address that. Otherwise, take care of yourselves. If you need to step out, if you are uncomfortable and you need to take a break, if you need to use the restroom, get a snack, take care of your kiddo, whatever you need to do, it's not rude. Please take care of yourself. 1 star, 1 shine. One of us is talking, the rest of us are listening. If you want to talk, feel free to just, get my attention so I can stop talking. I'm going to save lots of time at the end for everybody to talk and ask questions. And take space, make space. So if you're like me, you are the type of person who is quick to answer things, quick to jump in, quick to talk. If you're that type of person, take a few seconds, let those that maybe don't share quite as quickly or process as quickly get a chance to ask questions and share as well. So those were the group agreements. Does that all make sense? Cool. All right. So I see that Erin joined us. Erin, earlier we introduced ourselves. We said our name, how old our kiddos were, and on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not comfortable at all, and 5 being super comfortable, could talk about it, no problem. How comfortable are you talking to your kids about sex? If you would like to share. You don't have to.
Yeah, hi. I apologize for being late. I got stuck doing some work. I am Erin Green, and my kids are 9 and 5 years old, and I think I'm probably about a 4 comfortability. I feel pretty comfortable. I think my kid does not feel comfortable, so I feel bad about that. So I try to reel it in.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like, we may feel super comfortable giving our kiddos all the information they could ever handle, but that doesn't mean they're super comfortable, right? And so that's definitely something we can talk about. I'm glad that you brought that up. So let's get started. The birds and bees talk. So the birds and bees talk is a little misleading because there's not just one big talk. There's not just one sex talk. When we're talking to our kids about sex and sexuality, we're talking about all sorts of topics, all sorts of things, starting from when they're like in diapers. So we're talking about things like consent, like boundaries, like healthy relationships, anatomy, puberty, and also sex and sexual intercourse, what we think of when we think of the big talk. But these conversations kind of build on each other. They start when the child's young, and then they just keep going, and the conversation evolves and grows and keeps going. So I think it's important for us to consider the fact that sex and sexuality is so many aspects of our life. It's not just intercourse. So a lot of people just get hung up on that. So it's just important when we're talking about having these talks, we're expanding that idea. So I have a list of some different things that I got from this amazing resource that I'm going to share with you all that I love and my kiddos love. It's called amaze.org. Has anybody ever heard of amaze.org before? Okay, this is going to change your lives. I'm telling you. We use this. Okay, so they are these sex ed videos that are made for preschoolers, for adolescents, for high schoolers, for parents, and it breaks down these really hard topics to talk about in ways that make sense to kiddos. My kids will sit and watch it for hours if I let them. Like, they love these freaking videos. They're amazing, and we use them in the classroom too. There's topics about like everything. So I highly, highly recommend checking out amaze.org. You can even watch the videos with your kiddos, especially if you're having a hard time starting those conversations, or maybe your kiddos are uncomfortable listening to you. You can put on this video and watch it with them, and it can spark conversation. And you can be like, what did you think about that? Did you have any questions about any of that? That was a lot of information. Let's talk about it. And that way you have something to watch with your kid that is kind of a pathway to get that conversation going. So this is from that website. And it's 8 things you should know before you start talking to your kiddos about sex. So sometimes people wonder and worry that giving information to their kids is harmful. They think, oh, I'm going to put all these ideas in their head and then they're going to want to go have sex. And the truth is that studies have shown that the more parents and guardians talk to their kiddos about sex and sexuality and bodies and puberty and all those topics, the more likely they are to postpone and have safer sex in the future because they have the information. Talking with young children about sex, gender, and reproduction in their early years sets you up to be their trusted adult. So when we're teaching sex ed in the classroom, we're always like, if you need more information, talk to a trusted adult, because y'all are the ones who can give the values. You're the ones who can give the guidance. As sex ed teachers, we can give the information, but then y'all as parents and guardians get to move further with that and put the values on that, put the guidance on that you want to instill in your kid. So when you're talking to your kid about these things, it sets you up to be that person that they go to versus the internet and Googling, because y'all know what can happen if kids do that. Not the best information. Also, you don't have to wait to talk to them about things, because if we wait, sometimes those conversations don't come up because your kiddo may not know that they can go to you for stuff. So if you start those conversations on your own, and I'll tell you how to do that, then it starts opening up those lines of communications for them. Too much information too soon. A lot of people worry about that too. Like, if I tell them, about this, is this gonna blow their minds up? Is this gonna be harmful? And the truth is that kids will tune us out. Like, if they have no interest in what you're saying, if it's too much information, they're gonna be like, yeah, okay, mom, and then they'll move on and do something else. Like, it's not gonna harm them if you give too much information. It's okay. I always worry about that too. And I'm like, oh man, did I just tell them too much stuff? Is this gonna rot their brains? What am I doing? And I'm like, whatever. Better too much than too little. Also, a key point that sometimes gets missed in the conversations is talking about gender and gender expression. Talking with the kiddo how things can influence them and make them think certain things about their gender, about what they can and can't do, expectations. Super important to have those conversations about where gender comes from, how it's a construct, how we're not limited by our gender, and how gender expression can vary. Those are things that sometimes we don't think about when we think of sex, the talk about sex. And you all might already be doing that, and that's awesome, but just wanted to point that out. Putting ideas in kiddos' heads. Sometimes we worry that we're gonna put ideas in their heads if we tell them about sex. Not necessarily gonna happen. They're gonna be curious anyway, and they're gonna find out how to get that information without you. I have a funny story about when my kiddo was younger. Their daddy was transitioning. So they were born a woman and they were transitioning to be a man, and they would give themselves shots of testosterone. And I thought that I had covered everything with my kiddo to explain what was happening, but apparently I missed some information and they filled in the gaps on their own. And they thought when they were going to get vaccinations that they were going to turn into a man. And I was like, oh no, I totally dropped the ball on that one. So sometimes we fail, and then we pick up the pieces, and then we learn we need to explain it a little bit better. So it's okay. But having the conversations, just because they're not asking doesn't mean they're not wondering. All right. I already covered that. And then finally, let's see. It's never just one talk. That is an antiquated idea. It is multiple conversations throughout their life. It's ongoing. And even if you cover something when they're little, it evolves and they need more information as they grow, and you need to build on it. So it's like building blocks. You start small when they're little, and you keep building and building and building and giving more and more information as they get older. All right. So we all have kiddos that aren't in diaper. Well, my 3-year-old's still in diapers, but potty training fail. But when they're really small, we teach them about their body parts, right? We teach them head, nose, ears. That includes also their genitals and their reproductive body parts. So using correct terminology like penis, scrotum, vulva, vagina. All of that's really important, because if we use cutesy little nicknames because maybe we're uncomfortable, it then teaches them that there's stigma around their genitals. It teaches them that there's shame, because they're like, well, I call my nose, but I call my vagina and vulva down there. Like, why can't I say those words? And so it starts this thought process that there's something wrong. And then there's the shame and the stigma, and it doesn't set them up for a healthy relationship with their body going forward. So it's totally fine, because my kiddos have certain names for their body parts. They like to use butt instead of gluteus maximus or whatever, but they know what their body parts are named. So if they have to go to a doctor, they can tell the doctor what part of their body is hurting, and the doctor knows what they're talking about because it's a common shared language. It really helps if there's any issues going forward where your child needs to come to you about anything regarding their genitals. You'll know what they're talking about. We teach our babies about sex ed and having loving and comforting touch. When we respond to the needs of our babies, it's teaching them about healthy relationships. It's teaching them what feels good and what's appropriate. Consent and boundaries, super important when children are starting, 3 years old, 4 years old. It's really important to teach them that they don't run up to someone and hug them, that they need to ask first. And it can start with talking about, hey, can I give you a kiss goodnight tonight? And then respecting it if they say no, and explaining to them, I'm asking because it's really important that somebody ask before they touch you, and you can say no. You don't have to hug grandma. If you want to, fine. If you don't want to, it's your body and you don't have to. And then letting relatives and friends and folks in the world know, my kiddo doesn't have to hug you if they're uncomfortable, and you have to be okay with that. So teaching about consent from a really young age can then help build as they get older, and the conversation can continue. Same with boundaries. We don't run up and we don't steal somebody's bag of chips. Like, there's boundaries. You need to ask first. You need to respect somebody's property. All of those conversations happen preschool age. If they haven't started happening yet, it's not too late. You can start having these conversations at any time. And then as they get older, they get out of diapers, they're in underpants, they notice that they can touch their genitals. They start touching their penis. They start touching their vulva. Sometimes that can make folks feel really nervous and uncomfortable because they don't know how to handle that. So the appropriate thing to do to set them up for success in their life with their body is not to shame them about it. It's just to acknowledge the reality. When we touch certain parts of our bodies, it feels different. Sometimes it feels good. That's totally normal, but that's done in private. If it's something in your house that you feel comfortable with your child doing in private. If not, then you can explain to them why not. But it's important not to shame them, because then it sets them up again for stigma and shame around their sexuality and touching of their body. And we touched a little bit of this earlier about gender. Usually around preschool, kindergarten, kiddos start noticing there's a difference between boys and girls. And they get very much into the category of that's a boy, that's a girl. That can be a really great time to have conversations around gender if that's something that you're wanting to talk to your kiddo about. That yes, some people have penises, some people have vulvas. Just because a person has a penis doesn't automatically make them a boy. Just because a person has a vulva doesn't automatically make them a girl. We can never know somebody's gender unless we respectfully ask them. If we're not sure, we can always use the pronoun they. And so it kind of simplifies the idea that gender isn't always cut and dry, if that's something that you feel comfortable as a parent talking to your kiddo about. Then the question of where do babies come from? This is the one that parents are like, oh my gosh, what do I do? They want to know where babies come from. What do I say? So when they're little, they're not asking about sex. They don't even really have a concept of what that means. What they're asking about is, how do babies happen? What what's the science behind that? And so I'm going to share a really awesome book with y'all. And this is for younger kiddos. It's called What Makes a Baby. I don't know if y'all have heard of this or not, but it's the book that I used with my kiddos because it's not gender. Erin, you've heard of it? Or you have a question? Just waving? Okay. No problem. It's non-gender specific, which I really appreciate. It just talks about the bodies. So some people have eggs, some people have sperm. An egg and a sperm meets up. It grows in the place called the uterus, and then the baby comes out. And then if the child wants more information, you can give them more information, but you don't have to. That kind of just breaks it down for them and takes away the mystery. But I highly recommend this book.
Family Strengths, available for checkout. And the other thing is that it does introduce the possibility of infertility, which is how both of my children arrived in the world, which makes me happy to have a book that I can refer to because, yeah, there was no sex involved.
Right. Ditto with my family. There was no sex involved with how my kiddos came to be. And so when we have, because we used a sperm donor, and so when I talk, you know, it's like, well, how do you have that conversation? Well, there's a sperm and an egg. Doesn't say where the sperm and egg came from, but there's a sperm and egg. They meet up and it grows, and then the baby's born. And it also talks about C-section and vaginal birth, which I think is super important too. Some babies are born with an incision. Some babies are born vaginally. Both are totally normal. And so I really appreciate the fact that the book is very inclusive. So I recommend it. So another thing that we get asked sometimes is what happens if kiddos don't ask things? What the heck do you do? It's like, great, I can answer questions, but they're not asking. So again, my favorite, amaze.org, some discussion starters. So I like to call them, and we call them teachable moments. So moments that arise that you can use as a starting point. So some teachable moments or things that can come up is, hey, there's something we never talked about before, and I think it's time we talk about it. Or you're watching a show and somebody is pregnant and you're like, have you ever wondered how somebody gets pregnant? You know, all sorts of different things. You just have to be on the lookout for them to get that conversation going. And these are some different conversation starters from amaze.org that somebody can help or somebody can use to help them out with getting it started. And then the big one, what if they do ask questions? Because then that opens up a whole new thing like, okay, now they're asking and I don't know what to say. So I have an awesome resource that is kids.ask or kids-ask.org. So let me show you how this works. Let me see if it'll show it to you all. Probably not, because I'm not so great with technology. Control, click. Well, anyway, you can play around with it on your time, but it's amazing because how it works is, hold on. Okay, so let's say you want to respond to a question. So if you'll notice up here, it says, I want to, and it's got a drop-down thing, either start a conversation or respond to a question. You select the age range of your kiddo and the topic, and then it helps you build a script of how to answer their question. So you have a script right there to help you. And so that can kind of take away some of the stress. If a kiddo asks you a question in the moment and you're like, oh, I need to use that website, it's okay to be like, hey, you know what? I need a little bit of time. Let me get back to you on that. And then take the time you need in order to collect yourself, figure out what you want to say, and then come back to the conversation. Don't forget to go back to it because you want to remain as a trusted adult. So make sure you go back to the conversation. So there'll be a list of resources at the end in case you didn't quite catch that website. So the important things when answering the questions are to validate the question. So saying something like, that's a really great question, or thank you so much for asking me about that. It helps build their confidence, and it helps let them know that it's great that they came to you all with a question. Clarify and confirm. So sometimes you think you know what they're asking, but really they're asking something completely different, and you go off on this whole tangent answering what you think they're asking, and you get to the end of it and you're so proud of yourself, and they're like, yeah, but no, I meant, you know, something completely benign and like simple. And you're like, oh, okay. Whoops. So it's really important to make sure you know what they're asking. So you can just reframe it and be like, oh, are you asking blah, blah, blah? Or I think what you're asking is this, just so you can make sure that you know exactly what they're asking. Sharing a fact. So especially as they get older, if you lie or make something up, they have access to information via the internet, and they can be like, yo, you know when you said that babies come from storks? Yeah, that's not true, Mom. They can call your bluff, and then you're seen as somebody that they can't go to. So it's really important to stick to the facts. Share a feeling. So this is the part where you get to model expressing feelings. So you can be like, I'm so thankful that we're able to talk about this, or it's really important that you wash your penis, or whatever it is that they're asking you about. And then you get to put the layer of the value on it. So as parents, and this is something that I struggle with sometimes, is we get to share our value with what they're asking. And I think I struggle with it so much because as a sex educator, that's a huge no-no, right? Like I can't share my values with students. But then when it's my own kids, I have every right to share my values with them, and it's important. So if they're asking, you know, or if I see them, I walk in on them playing doctor, right, with their clothes off, I can be like, you know, that's not something we do in this house. That's not safe for you to play that way. We play with our clothes on. I get to share my value with them on that. And I get to have rules. So those are the steps in answering the question. And so when you go to that script, it'll show you each of these steps in why they built the script the way they did. All right, I've talked enough. I've blah, blah, blah'd. Boring, boring, boring. This is the time that you all get to pick my brain and ask me anything that you want, maybe anything that you've gotten weird, tricky questions from your kiddos, or you've heard somebody else's kiddo ask, or you're just worried that it's going to come out, or you're not sure if you handled something in the right way. This is your time. And if you don't have any questions, I can definitely keep talking, but it's more fun if you all ask things, because I think it's more fun. So anybody want to jump in? If you're not comfortable asking a question on camera, because it's being recorded, then you can chat it into the chat box. And I won't say who chatted. I can't see the chat box. Maybe y'all can. I don't know. I'm so bad with, oh, let me stop sharing maybe, and then I'll share again when I pull up the resources. Okay, now I can see the chat box. Aw, Ruth had to go. I just saw that. I saw that they dropped off. I was like, oh no, I hope I didn't offend them. But they think it's a great topic, y'all. Okay, so if anybody wants to chat something in, I won't say who you are if you're not comfortable, or you can unmute however you want. If you have anything you want to ask or say. I also want to say I gave the whole presentation without my notes because I wasn't able to pull them up. So if I missed anything, I really apologize. So yeah. Oh wait, Lizzie's saying something, but I can't hear you. Try again. Oh wait, yeah, now I can.
Now you can.
It just takes a minute. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was just saying, if she missed anything, it's totally my fault, not your fault. Because I haven't tried to share my screen before. I should have practiced.
It's all good.
I had some questions and then like I forgot them. I think like it was, I'll try to write them down if they come back. I know my education on this was very lacking. And so I've tried to teach my kid like all the proper names, because like I hear a lot of people say like my vagina, but that's like your vagina's not like everything. Like this,
Right.
like your vagina is not, it's like there's different part. I think you guys know what I'm saying.
Yeah, the vagina is the inside part, and the vulva is everything on the outside.
On the outside,
yes. Like the clitoris, the labia, everything on the outside is the vulva, and the vagina is just the opening and the inside. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. My education did not include that information until I was an adult, and it was actually my husband who taught our oldest child the difference. And I was like, okay, I got to catch up now. Like I've got to learn a lot more so that they can use the, you know, when they need to talk about their body in that way. So my question was somewhere in there and I lost it. So I'm sorry. I'm trying to.
Sorry, it's totally fine. Maybe it'll pop back into your head. But yeah, there is a lot. I mean, I don't think I knew the word vulva. I don't know if I even regularly used it until I started teaching sex ed. Like, I'm sure I knew it, but it wasn't a big part of my language that I can remember. So yeah, I totally get that. And it's definitely something that still occurs. Yeah. And for some reason, I have a really hard time with remembering scrotum versus testicles. Like, I always want to call them testicles. And my husband's like, those are inside the scrotum. And I'm like, I know that. Like, what is wrong with me? So we're not perfect. It's okay. Wait. Okay, now.
The question of you know, the testicles being inside versus scrotum, that had not occurred to me.
Right?
Different. I'm like, oh. There's no way my 4-year-old can say that.
Scrotum?
We'll just call it otum. He can't do blends at the beginning of words.
Yeah. Well, my kiddos don't like the word vulva, so they choose not to use that for their body part. And I'm fine with that because I'm like, it's your body. You can name it what you want. Like, as adults, we get to name our bodies however we feel comfortable. And I think that's important. But they know when I refer to it and when a doctor refers to it, it's going to be vulva. But yeah, they say junk. They say crotch. They say just vajayjay. Oh, I hate that. I'm like, where did you hear that? Like, don't use that word here. But fine, if that's what you want to call it. And just like, oh, your vulva? Mm-hmm. I have a funny story about, you know, like, I don't know about y'all's kids, but mine love to ask questions when it's the most inappropriate, inconvenient time. Like, I'm sitting in the line at the bank, and my now almost 9-year-old, y'all, Lissy and Aaron, you know, Addie, is like, what does intersex mean, Mom? You know, like, what is that? And I'm like, and I have like a screaming baby in the back. And at the time, I think my middle was like 3 or 4, and they're like, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, focus. How am I going to answer this? And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, really? This is the time you choose to ask So I did my best, but it's just like, really, like, do we have to ask questions when it's not the time? Or like right before bed when you're like, I know you're trying to get out and going to bed.
I thought of a question.
Mm-hmm.
This is one that I actually came across in one of my classes. And I was kind of frustrated with the text, but it described, so I guess my question is, as far as sexual orientation versus sexual identity, how do you break those down for your child in a way that they feel that you feel they understand it and are also sharing enough information where they're aware that it doesn't have to just be like the construct that they're exposed to because of advertising and, you know, norm groups or in groups and, you know, things like that, like who they're around. And yeah, so the textbook wasn't very helpful.
Oh, that's a great question. And that, so with a young kiddo, like someone our kid's age, I would probably answer it something like this, like, you know, if they said, you know, what's the difference between sexual orientation and sexual identity, which they probably wouldn't use that language, but if they did, I'd be like, that is an awesome question. That's something that a lot of people are confused about. So sexual identity is how somebody feels inside, how they represent themselves, how they feel in their heart and in their brain, whether they're a boy or a girl or something in between or neither. And then sexual orientation is who somebody wants to be in a romantic relationship with. So who somebody wants to date or who somebody wants to kiss or be married to. So the difference is who they are on the inside and who they're attracted to. That's how I would answer it. If they were older and I was trying to be funny, I might say something like, sexual identity is who you go to bed as, and sexual orientation is who you go to bed with. That's how I would answer it if they were older. But if they're little, they might not understand that concept just because, you know, they're like, go to bed with, like my stuffies, like they might not make that connection. But once we've talked, I mean, I've talked to my 9-year-old about what sex is because their friend told them about it, and I wanted to make sure that they had, you know, the information that I felt was important. So we did have the conversation about sexual intercourse and what that means and how there's lots of ways to define it, and they get to choose for themselves what that means as long as they're okay with it and they feel comfortable with it. And that I asked that they would talk to me about anything that came up for them when they're older, when they're ready to start having sex. But yeah, they know what it is. And then they were horrified and said they were never sleeping in my bed again. And I said, don't worry, you don't need to worry about that. And they were like, well, how will I know not to come in if you and dad are having sex? And I'm like, we would lock the door. And they're like, but your door's never locked. I'm like, right, so you don't need to worry. We're just going to bed. We're exhausted. So yeah, that's how that conversation went. And then I asked that they not share their knowledge with their friends because I felt like their parents needed to have that conversation. Granted, I forgot to tell them that till they got home from school. So I had to tell all of the kiddos' parents, just so you know, in case your kiddo asks. I talked to Addie about sex.
Yeah. Something occurred to me that I kind of stumbled across when I was talking. Finn and I've talked about, you know, I watched a lot of Grey's Anatomy with him in the house, and he, you know, walks in at the most inopportune moments always.
Great teachable moment.
We eventually had, I was like, all right, come on, let's just do this. Let's just do this now. And we talked about it for a while, but he's not a question person. So I know I need to, you know, go back into it. I know I need to do that. And the thing I'm struggling with is how to express the like, this is for later, this is for like, I my parents would have just said, this is for when you're married.
Right.
And that's obviously not what I want to say.
Yeah.
I don't know how to say, like, you need to wait till you're older.
No, I totally get that, because you don't want to put a time on your kid's life, right? Like, you don't want to be like, you have to wait till you're 16 or whatever the age is, because that just sets it up to be like some random age. Like, there's no, but I hear you, because obviously you don't want your 9-year-old having sex. And so I think it's okay to say something like, you know, when talking about sex, it's like, well, it's something that people do when they are ready to have these difficult conversations with their partner about protection, about sexually transmitted infections, about pregnancy, if that's something that they're worried about consent, about pleasure. And so it's really something that somebody does when they're older and they're able to have those conversations in a way that makes sense.
That's a really good way to put it off. I remember my older sister telling my younger brother, I will buy you condoms once, but after that, if you are too chicken to buy your own condoms, you are too young to have sex.
I mean, it comes with responsibility, right? And so a question, because we always do this thing in the classroom called anonymous question box. So students can write down their anonymous questions and put it in the box, and we answer them all. And so a question that I always get is, when am I going to be ready to have sex? And it's like, well, it's different for everyone, but these are the things that a person should think about before they know whether or not they're ready. And, you know, and it's, as they're older too, it's like, well, how would you feel if people found out? How would you feel about it afterwards? How might it change your relationship with that person? All of these things come into play, and these are the things that you need to think about before you make that decision. But when they're little, that's kind of hard to explain. But when they're older, I forgot to tell you all about this book too. So that same author wrote another book called Sex is a Funny Word. And it goes more in depth, and it's for a little bit of an older audience because it covers puberty, it covers bodies, it covers sex. It's got pretty much everything in it. I haven't read it all the way yet to my 9-year-old, but I think I'm gonna start. And so it's also a really great resource. I would recommend reading it first before you share it with your kiddo to make sure that, you know, everything in it is something that you're ready to have conversations with your kiddo about. But it's also, you know, reading books together. If you're not comfortable reading it together, you know, just leaving it out, just having it available. Mine are just on the bookshelf with all the other books just to make it super normal. Like, we read this before bed a lot. McKenna shared it in her reading class in kindergarten. It just normalizes it, you know, and it just makes it where it's not taboo. It's just a part of life, and it's just a part of these conversations. And so I recommend that book as well. And then when they're older and teens, if you know any teens, where I work at the Responsible Sex Education Institute, they wrote a book called In Case You're Curious. And so they compiled all of the anonymous questions and text messages that we get on our text line, and they put them all on there and answered all of them with all of the illustrations. So I intend, when my kiddos are older, just leaving it out and having it available to them to check out as well, so that as they get older, if there's things that they would rather not ask me about, they have the ability to get that information. I also want to share my screen so I can show you the resources that I put, so that you have something to take with you when you leave. So let me share that real quick. I can't. There we go.
Out of another one.
Yes, please.
Porn.
Yes, and that is something that I am, oh my gosh, okay. So in my job, we don't have any lessons about porn. And that has always really bothered me because I, as my own self, before really thinking about it in terms of my children, I was like, I have no issues with porn, whatever, people can do what they want with their bodies, not taking into consideration ethical porn or, you know, what's perpetuated in a lot of popular porn and free porn that's accessible to young folks. So I started doing a lot of research about it because I needed to figure out why it could potentially be harmful. And so I've done a ton of research. And when talking about porn, because the conversation apparently needs to start when they're 8, 9, because they have access to it, because they have tablets. We can try super hard to regulate it. We can try super hard to put parental, you know, blocks on it. We can't protect it when they're out with their friends. We can't, and it's not looking at a Playboy magazine anymore. It's looking at hardcore, harmful, mess with your head porn. So the things that are important to talk to your kid about when they're young, before they even know what pornography is, hopefully, is, and this is what I told my kiddo. I said, hey, there's stuff on the internet that's meant for adults. It's geared and supposed to only be viewed by adults. It's called pornography. It's naked bodies having sex or doing things that might be shocking. If you come across anything like that, I want you to come to me so we can talk about it. The reasons are because it's not realistic. It's all fantasy. It's like watching a make-believe movie and trying to learn something from it. It's not going to give you the right information. And it could potentially harm you thinking that it is real. So that when you are older and you are in relationships, you might think that's what sex looks like, but that's not what sex looks like. Sex looks like consent. It looks like people agreeing to have sex, and they don't talk about it in those movies. It's about people protecting each other. And they don't talk about that in those movies. It's all make-believe and it's all fantasy. And so if you're ever disturbed or harmed or nervous or uncomfortable or you feel a weird feeling in your stomach, that's a sign that you need to come talk to me so that we can talk about what you saw and I can explain it to you. And then as they get older, you know, they might be interested in porn. And so it's just really important to reiterate that it's just a fantasy, that it's not reality, that it's not real sex. And if they want information on real sex, you can give them actual resources that will tell them what sex actually is versus what's shown in this fantasy. In the classroom, we say it's like trying to learn how to drive by watching Fast and Furious. We don't learn from movies. It's just for fun and entertainment. And pornography is meant for adults. And the reason is because kids can't distinguish between what's real and what's fake. Like they haven't really made those connections yet. And so that's why porn is specifically harmful to young people, because they can't separate the fact that what they're seeing isn't really what's going to happen when they have sex. And it's not really what people are necessarily wanting, right? There's a whole video on it for kiddos. Probably a little bit older than 9. I would say probably like 12 or 13 because it has cartoon breasts in it. But it is on amaze.org. But it might give you some tips on what to say. You could like pick parts out of it.
That is spectacular. I love the like comparing it to a completely unrealistic like show that is a great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like we're not going to show you Fast and Furious and be like, okay, you can go drive now. We're not going to show you pornography and be like, you're good to go have sex. Like that's not how it works. Yeah.
that reminds me of one of my questions. My husband and I were watching a show that doesn't normally have, it was a sketch comedy show, and it doesn't normally have depictions of sex or sexuality. They'll make jokes about it. It was Portlandia.
Yeah.
Some people like that show. I love that show.
It.
And so, it's one of those things that we weren't, the kids weren't in the room with us. They were in another room. And I was like, oh, let's watch the recording. Normally, if a kid walks in, it's no big deal because the jokes go right over their head.
Right.
Or we just turn off the TV if it's something, I don't know. We're usually not that fast. But
sorry, my kids are hanging out there with my husband.
It's totally normal. My husband's behind me too. You can't see him. Cloud City. Anyway, sorry. My kid happened to walk in. My older kid happened to walk in. Like, it was just timing. Like, they were doing a sketch where it was a polyamorous couple, and they were just making a joke. And the two of the partners were having sex, and it was comical sex. It wasn't like porn at all. But my kid was like, what are they doing? What, she was really curious. Mm-hmm. And I was really not ready in that moment. And I was going to say something really terrible, like they're wrestling, or, just like something, because I wasn't ready. I didn't expect for that to be on the TV. I didn't expect for her to walk in right then. I didn't expect for any of it to be all at once like that. Yeah. And so I just didn't have like a script, like an elevator speech. And so I guess I'm wondering, like, what is it good? Is the amaze.org or the kid-ask.org, is that a great place to find an elevator speech? I'm really thankful that my husband was there, because he's really good. He's really comfortable just using proper terminology for body parts, and really, like, he doesn't make it weird. He's like, oh, they were having sex. And she's like, well, what is that? And he was like, well, some people, it feels good, and they do it for fun, or they do it to make a baby. And then, it was like this whole like super nonchalant thing. And she was like, okay. She just left the room. And I'm sitting there like, what's happening?
Well, it's pretty awesome that you have a partner who's like able to have those conversations, because if you're caught off guard in the moment, it's great to have support, because then there's still, a trustworthy adult, their dad, there to fill that in. And the thing is with kids, and I'm sure you know this, but like, you can always have a do-over. Like, you can always be like, so remember when Dad and I were watching that show and you asked me what sex was? I didn't know how to answer you in the moment, but I'd love to talk to you about it now. And then you can have the conversation when you feel ready, when you feel comfortable, when you feel prepared. And you can totally get a script from ask kids. Whatever it was. Oh, it's right there. kids.ask.org. But yeah, I think everything that he said was great. It's like, so it feels good. Some people do it because it feels good. And some people do it when they want to have a baby. It's something that older people do because they want to. And as long as both people are okay with it and they're, consenting, then it can be a really great thing. What specific questions do you have? And you can let them be like, well, how exactly does it work? And you can be like, well, it works differently for different people depending on how they define it. People get to decide what feels good for their bodies. Have you ever noticed that when you touch certain parts of your body, it feels good? Well, when you're older, sometimes when you're with a partner, they might touch those parts if you're okay with it. And you might touch their parts if they're okay with it. And that's called sex. Sometimes it involves a penis. Sometimes it involves a vagina, but not always. You get to decide what it means. You can go in as much detail that you're comfortable with, but they might have specific questions if he didn't answer it the way that they wanted. But yeah, you get to build that script, and you can use that script builder. You can watch amaze.org. You can watch it with your kiddo. Like, you can watch videos with them and be like, I know you're asking about that. I found this really awesome video. Let's watch it together. And then if you have questions, I can answer them for you. But that's probably one of my favorite parts of being a parent is you can always reflect and then have a do-over and repair it. It's like, okay, I didn't do great that time. Let's go back and fix it. All is not lost. Yeah. Now, if you had been like, get out, what are you doing? Don't look. That might be a little bit harder to repair. There's also, I know 2 folks have dropped off, but they can watch this recording to catch this part. But there's a text line that we have for parents that if something does come up that you need advice on, or you're not sure how to answer, or you don't know how to make a script for, you can text TALK, T-A-L-K, to those numbers, 57890. And one of the folks that I work with answers it, and they'll be able to shoot you an answer. And so it's a really great resource, and you can share it with any folks that you know who has a kiddo in their life that they're like, I don't know what to do. It's just extra support.
Yeah, thank you. One other question that I have is, so we live multi-generationally, which means, I'm sure you both know, but I mean, if someone watches this later, that my parents moved into my home. And so we all live together and support each other. And for the most part, it's positive. There are some frustrations that come up for myself and my partner where, like traditional ideas around sex and shame and bodies and shame are reinforced, and they're not even like conscious about it, or even like binary gender is reinforced in a very unconscious way, and I feel like extra vigilant around it because you know, Jake and I had tried really hard to destigmatize, just like the first step for us was destigmatize our bodies. I didn't want my kids to ever think they couldn't be safe with their dad because he had a penis. Does that make sense? Like, yeah. And so that was like the first step. Like, we're not like defined by sex, like, you know, like a body is a body, and it's not like all about its sex organs. And so, you know, we've tried really hard to have a pretty open conversation constantly, but what I hear sometimes, and I know like if it didn't happen at home, it would happen at school, or it would happen with friends. Like, it's just the normal, I mean, I say normal, but it shouldn't be normal, but it's just like what's culturally acceptable as far as like the binary definitions of not just gender, but sex and expectations, things like that. And I get frustrated, and I don't know how to bring that topic up with my parents in a way that's not hurtful to them, because like they're not trying to hurt my children. I don't want to hurt them. You know, their values reflect the time that they came of age, you know? So there's a question in there somewhere. No, how do I have these conversations?
What I'm hearing is, how do we address the different influences that impact our kiddos when we want them to be aware of what those influences are so that they can make decisions for themselves about what it is that, who they are and how they feel on the inside, right? So whether it's influences from their grandparents, whether it's influences from the media, whether it's influences from friends, all these things that can be put on our kiddos that we want to protect them from, right? Is that what you're saying? So that's a tricky one, because influences are a huge concept. And I've attempted to have those conversations with my kiddos, not my 3-year-old, because I don't think he necessarily is there yet. Maybe some 3-year-olds are, he's not. But definitely with McKenna and Addie, the 5-year-old and the 9-year-old. So what I've done and what I do is we have conversations about, you know, what it means. Oh, there's just so many conversations. So it's like, what does it mean to be a boy? What does it mean to be a girl? What do they think of when they think of boy and girl? What have they learned from other people about that? How do they feel about that? Like, my parents will say something like, I remember when Addie was little, they really wanted boy underwear, right? The underwear that are for boys, that have like the open flap brief thing. And I remember my mom's partner being like, oh, well, Addie's going to get made fun of. Only boys wear that. And, you know, Addie was there. And so we just have the conversation like, people can wear what they want. It's their body. It's not a big deal. And it's so tricky. It's mostly just calling it out when it happens. Not in a hurtful way to your parents, because of course you don't want to shame them or hurt them for how they feel and what they think. And if it's too much to do it in front of them, then trying to take a note of what you noticed and have a private conversation with your kiddo later and be like, so you remember when this happened? What did you think about that? And they'll be like, I didn't think anything. What are you talking about? And you can be like, well, it made me think that, you know, it made me feel like girls can't do this certain thing. Do you agree with that? And then you can be like, well, no, or yes. And you can be like, well, why don't you agree with that? What do you think it means to be a girl? And so just having a segue to like sneak those little worms of critical thinking in their brain, or like with a TV show, if something happens, you can be like, I just noticed that. I'm trying to think of an example, and it's like, all right, I just noticed that the mom is at home while the dad is off working. Do you think that always happens? Do you think that should happen? What do you think about that? Well, I don't know. Blah, 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 blah. It's like, well, I think that, you know, we see a lot of times these roles for people who are men and women, and we know that not everybody fits in those roles. And we also know that not everybody is a man and a woman. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about what that means. And you can start that conversation. So it's just finding ways to get those wheels turning so that you don't have to call your grandparents out or your parents out, their grandparents, but you're instilling in them to start thinking critically about those messages.
Yeah, that was so helpful. Thank you. I like the critical thinking, especially, you know, just to be like, hey, do you remember when that happened and how did it make you feel? And this is how it made me feel. I really like that's something that my reaction usually tends to be to like jump on it immediately if I hear it, which isn't always positively received because, like I said, you know, I know my parents are not trying to hurt my children. I wish that we could have conversations where they might start to broaden their view, but you know, they are who they are. You know, I don't know. It's something that probably will happen eventually, but right now, you know, we're at where we're at, and so I definitely have experienced like the story with the clothes that I heard you share. Mm-hmm. We had a similar thing where there was something in it, but it was like in the boys section of a store. And I remember hearing my mom say, well, that's for little boys. And it was like pants or something. And I was like, clothes don't have a gender. These pants look warm and they have pockets. Therefore, I'm going to get them for my child. And it was, and so I've noticed that like my 5-year-old gravitates more towards traditionally male, like traditional for boys type, and so that was something that I saw that my mom and dad both were able to like change their worldview and be supportive of. So I know that the possibility is there. It's just like crossing like each bridge as we come to it. And now they're super supportive and they don't make any comments about clothes. And then if they see something and they know that, you know, my 5-year-old would like it, it doesn't matter what section it's in. They're like, oh, this is good for Charlotte. Let's get that, you know? So I know that they have just like any person, right? When you're challenging values that are institutionalized. You kind of have to go slow. So
Well, something just popped into my brain, and if it is something that you're wanting to address in the moment, maybe being like, oh, mom or dad, like, why do you feel that way? And letting them speak their mind. And you'd be like, well, this is what I think. And then you can speak your mind, and you can be like, hey, kiddo, what do you think?
Mhm.
And let them speak their mind. So that way everybody's hearing everybody else's point of view without a judgment on it. And that way, the kiddo can kind of get that exposure from you, hearing what you have to say as well, but then also being able to come up with what they feel. And so that's also an option if it's something that you don't think would spark too much drama.
No, that sounds incredible, especially like asking what the kid felt too in the moment, because I think that is more impactful than like me, because then I think at a certain point, like I heard you say, the tuning out, like it's not just my kids that do that, it's also my parents, where they're like, okay, she's on a soapbox. And they just tune me out.
And that way everybody gets heard and respected for how they feel, but the kiddo also has a voice and starts being included in the conversation so that they start thinking about things and not just absorbing.
Yeah, thank you. That was great.
You're welcome. I could talk about this forever.
You're probably getting to about the length of recording that my computer can handle. So I'm going to say thank you, Caitlin. This has been wonderful. There's lots of awesome stuff in here for you guys to, for everyone to check out. I really like the kid-esque thing. That sounds awesome.
And if anybody is ever interested in having a family workshop and getting tools on how to talk to your kiddos about sex in a more hands-on way in a workshop format, feel free to reach out to me. We have lessons available about that as well.
Awesome. Very cool. Thank you so much. I'm going to, let's